Welcome, 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 You-est listeners. Oh my goodness. I really wish I had just recorded the intention that Aaron and I just set. It set the tone. Maybe we'll do one at the end, which would be really cool. I am so honored to have Aaron Abke here as my guest. I have been actually imagining and really like wanting and hoping he would be a guest for a long, long time. His work and his teachings and his wisdom is incredible. So let me tell you a little bit about him. For some of you, you might know Aaron Abke. For others, you might not. Aaron Abke was born and raised as a pastor's son in the Silicon Valley of California. He desired to work in church ministry like his father and went to college at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, graduating with a bachelor's degree in music and theology. He spent 1 year working as a full-time worship pastor at a church in San Jose until eventually at 23, he felt called to leave his religion and pursue a deeper and more authentic spirituality. At 27 years old, Aaron had a dramatic spiritual awakening that changed the course of his life. He was working as a signed fitness model in San Francisco and competing at the national level in the men's bodybuilding at the time, and completely walked out of his former life to dedicate his life to seeking how to return to that state of self-realization permanently. I'm so excited to talk about this. Aaron's passion is teaching unity consciousness and spiritual awakening within the world, and he does so today via YouTube, social media, master classes, and workshops, primarily teaching texts such as A Course in Miracles and The Law of One. Aaron believes that unity consciousness and freedom from ego is the next evolutionary leap for mankind and is available for anyone who truly desires it. I am just going to take a moment, take that in, because I am so aligned with you. It is just not even funny. I love and adore who you are, who you've chosen to be. And I am so freaking grateful you're here, Aaron. Thank you.
I love the way you just said that, who you've chosen to be. I haven't heard anyone put it that way, but that's very much accurate from my point of view. You are who you choose to be in every moment.
Yeah, I think that we forget this, and so I'm firing my mind, and heart is firing like 20,000 ideas and questions, and I'm like, okay, we're going to focus here. This is what happens when I get really, really excited about our topic. But I think we forget this, and maybe this is a good place to start, because when I read about, to me, you are at the pinnacle of your this career as a bodybuilder, a top model, and you walked out. And it sounds like you really chose something else, or maybe it chose you. And I felt like that would be an interesting place, because that takes something to do that.
That is an interesting concept, because I don't know, it's all spiritual truth is a paradox at some level. Even when we just said you choose to be who you want to be in every moment, that's true from the relative level, not true from the absolute level, because from the absolute level, there's no you, right? There's just the one infinite creator dreaming of all these forms. And in some forms, seeking is happening. Desire for realization happens in some of these dream bodies, and in others, it's still not happening for whatever reason. And we're all at these different places, but it's like, who's driving that seeking for self-realization? We say, well, it's me. But the me we refer to is ordinarily, until enlightenment happens, is the ego, right? The idea that I'm a separate self who's seeking something called enlightenment, which I can attain, which will enhance me in some way and give me greater happiness. And really, enlightenment is the opposite of that. It's an annihilation of me and all the concepts I have about who I am, and the realization that there never was a seeker to begin with. There was just the source seeking itself, we could say. There's so many analogies I like to use for this, Julie, but one super easy one is like bubbles in the water. So if we imagine that the sky represents the one infinite creator source, and it, almost like putting a syringe into the water, injects these bubbles of its air from the sky into the water. The water represents the dream of Maya, the illusion. Those bubbles then start floating back to the surface, right? Some bubbles are bigger and float faster. Some bubbles are really small and float slower, but they're all returning back to the source from which they came. And in being injected into that water, each individual bubble forgets its skyness, right? Its infiniteness, and go, I'm just this little bubble named Aaron, right? I'm on this journey to find my skyness. And so we create this separate identity in the mind. We imagine it. Well, I used to float down there. I floated by the coral, and then I floated this way, and now I'm up here, and I'm getting closer to realization. What happens when the bubble reaches the surface? Does the bubble go anywhere? And the answer is, again, a bit paradoxical, because you really have to say, if you're being honest, there never was a bubble. There was just the sky, right? The bubble was something that the sky was doing, the air was doing. It returns back to that infinite sky, that air. So that's really what enlightenment is. It's an ending of the person, not an enhancement of the person. And so it's funny because the ego is kind of driving that seeking, which is the way Source intelligently designed it, right? The ego is that identifying mechanism in our minds. I'm this, I'm that. I did this, I did that. I, me, my, mine. That's ego. And it sees enlightenment. It hears the message of enlightenment as this amazing thing that can enhance me. I'll be like a guru or a sage. I'll be so happy I'll never suffer again. What an incredible enhancement of myself that would be. Let me pursue enlightenment. So then the ego pursues its own destruction without realizing it.
Oh, brilliant. Keep going.
That's all I got.
Oh, okay. I'm like, okay, hold on. I'm going to rewind. I'm like, rewind. This is so powerful, right? It's the destruction. The I, me, mine. You're in the land of ego. Well, we're probably mostly much of the time in ego, but I, me, mine. So I even think of the concept of choosing yourself, or what I talk about being your you-est you. For me, I'm curious what you feel about that. To me, it's it's constantly changing, the highest expression of your individuated expression of the sky, of Source. It's a question, it's a living into it. It's not an answer, it's not a finality, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
The you, so it's almost like there's different dimensions or versions. So the you, when did this awareness come? Because what we can see in the linear time is Aaron did the modeling thing, did the championship, and then left it. Maybe share, was there a wake up call? Was there you literally had of course in Miracles talks about shift in perspective as a miracle. Like, did you just see different? I know that's like beyond 101 and you're going to say way more about it, but I'm curious what happened that allowed you to just really do an about face to get this aspect.
Yeah. Well, I want to be very clear that I'm not saying that we are here to deny the personhood and humanness and it's all an illusion and screw it, right? I'm just nothing. It's not like that. Everything is divine. Everything is the play of the one consciousness, and therefore everything is sacred. Therefore everything is to be loved. But it's about the position from which you engage with it. Yeah. So when you're identified as the person, then you have to constantly defend yourself, protect yourself, constantly seek to enhance yourself, constantly seek to fulfill yourself. It's this exhausting, never-ending wild goose chase that, I don't know about you, but has any person ever done it? Like, has anyone ever been like, I, the person, have achieved fulfillment. I don't need to have sex anymore. I don't need to make money anymore. I don't need to go on vacations because I've achieved freedom. No, it never happens, right?
Yeah, I was like, I don't think so.
The more you have, the more you want. The ego is endlessly greedy, and that's designed that way again because that's what drives the seeking. The more desires the ego acquires, the more it actually enhances the need for desires. It creates more desires because none of them actually fulfill. Yep. There's a momentary lapse of suffering when you get that car, that partner, that whatever. Yeah, that seems to be liberation, but then it just wears off that quick. And you're back to the wild goose chase, back on the hamster wheel. And so it actually amplifies this aching need for really relief from myself, relief from this story of being a person who needs to be fulfilled. And that's kind of what I saw at 27 when I had that awakening experience. I was, at the time, I was just incredibly depressed, seemingly at a place where anyone would look at me and go, oh, this guy's got it all. He's a signed fitness model, San Francisco. He's a national level bodybuilder. He's going to be a pro bodybuilder soon. He's working at Google, best company you could work for. I seemingly had it all, and I was just absolutely depressed beyond belief. And luckily, I grew up in church. I had a very spiritual background. I loved God with all of my heart. And through leaving my religion, that contributed to a lot of my suffering and identity crisis. But I was just at this place where I was like, I don't know who I am, what I want, what can really make me happy. It feels like I'm stuck in this horrible nightmare that nothing will ever make me happy. And I, like all spiritual seekers, heard the message of enlightenment and went, oh, that's the freedom. So let me just start pursuing that. So for many years, I'd been listening to Eckhart Tolle and Muji and Alan Watts. And I was doing this on my break at work every day. I would go up to this balcony and listen to Eckhart Tolle. And it was like the only part of my day I would just kind of sit on these little recliner chairs they had up there and just look at the sky and listen to Eckhart for about an hour. And it would give me some relief and some peace of mind. And maybe a few months into that, one day there was a lecture Eckhart was giving where he was kind of laughing about things that ego says and making these little one-liners, and then the audience would laugh and he would laugh and I was laughing. And he went through like 4 or 5 of them. You know, if only people would treat me better, then I would truly be happy. And then he would laugh. And at some point I sort of laughed myself into a samadhi state or something because I saw the ridiculousness of it. Like, and it's not it wasn't a conceptual seeing where I could have put words on it. It really, the seeing that happened was an in-seeing that really annihilated my ability to think at all. It was like this total self-awareness of like, oh, that's just a mechanical voice I've been identifying with. It's not me. It's programmed to do that. It will always do that. All the things that have happened to me are just stories I'm believing. I am pure awareness. I'm pure consciousness. And even the subject-object kind of relationship I had taken towards God, we could say, seeking God, seeking enlightenment, I had seen just the humorous paradox of it, that like I had turned God, who's the eternal subject, right? Everything else is an object. God is the only subject there is. I had turned the one absolute subject into an object and was seeking that object. And I, in arrogance, became the subject. I'm the seeker and I will attain God. And it's just like, oh, so funny. And I spent like 2 weeks in this kind of blissed out state because I couldn't unsee that again. And it was just like impossible to care about anything in a negative sense. It was impossible to suffer. I literally, almost out of a humor, would try to remember all the things I was depressed about. Like, why in the hell did that bother me so much? I cannot remember. Like, what was the thing I was not seeing there? It's so obvious. It's all an illusion. It's all fake. And over the course of, after that 2-week period, I woke up on I think it was the day of 2 weeks that it hit. And I went, oh, wow, it's been 2 weeks since that experience, looking at my calendar. And I'm still in this state of freedom. And there was a thought that came in that said, I wonder if this will be my permanent state. I wonder if I will be like this forever. Have I become enlightened? Is this enlightenment? And that was the first thought of ego coming back online. And I didn't catch it because ego is really crafty like that. Yeah. And slowly the old programming and conditioning came back and the stories had meaning again. And I suffered again, but I had tasted it, right? I had tasted freedom and I couldn't unsee it. It was impossible to forget. Freedom, I cannot deny any longer. I've had a free sample of it. It's absolutely available. It's absolutely attainable. And so at that point, bodybuilding, fitness modeling, what a total waste of time. For who, for what, to fulfill what, a need that can't be met. I couldn't care less. Just walked out of it. And all my time devoted from then on to seeking how to return to that state, we could say.
Wow. Really powerfully, beautifully said. And I'm tracking with you. I heard your ego in there. It's the I. It's the I. And I'm like, oh, there he is. There he is, just shown up. And the amount of attention, and I want to get into this because in a moment about the ego and about love and about the just, how it's designed and how those that are listening that are, I have a feeling I'm talking to you. There's some of you I know that are like, I'm totally tracking, and some that are like, I'm lost, and it's okay. Wherever you are, it's all good. We're going to help you. I think of, so let me ask you this question. You started getting into A Course in Miracles, into the raw material. Um, I'm assuming that came from that experience of just, one of the quotes that I love, and I am not an expert in the Course in Miracles, to be very honest, but I've read through a good part of it. Well, I don't even know read. It's really dense material. I've sat with a lot of it is the best way maybe to, or try to be with it and let it flow through me and get my ego out of the way. The quote, I think it's love which created me is what I am. Just curious. I had an experience when I was very little that was this experience. And I think I've since been like, how do I get that, feel that, share that, like that knowingness, kind of what you were saying you had, it was not 2 weeks. I just remember there was a day, I don't know, I went around, I don't even know what happened, but I came home and I was like, oh my gosh, I could just see everyone is love. It's it. And
Yeah.
it's happened. I mean, I can get in that state, but my ego often gets in the she'll get in the way. And I'm curious maybe to talk a little bit just with A Course in Miracles for those that are newer to it, a little bit about what some of the high points of it, but also this, talking about love and the power of love, especially right now, because I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about the course. I have a program right now that we're doing the course every single morning. We go live for 20, 30 minutes and we read the daily lesson together. And then on Thursday nights, we have a workshop, an hour long like masterclass on like one of the key terms from the course because it uses the Christian language. And it's really a non-duality text taught through the Christian paradigm, Christian language. And so all the traditionally Christian words in the course have very different meaning than they're used traditionally in Christianity. So it does take some real unpacking and digesting to understand and sort of crack the code of the course. But it is absolutely the most powerful handbook to enlightenment that I've ever come across. And I think it's, I feel like all truly divine texts, especially like truly channeled works like the Law of One, like A Course in Miracles, they're almost like fractal in nature because they're not books you read like a book. There's like a paragraph, like in the course, it's just paragraph after paragraph, and it's putting forth an idea about liberation and, separation versus love and oneness and all this. And each sentence is like a universe of meaning. And it's like, you could just read that sentence over and marinate on it and contemplate it, and it just does its work in you. And then even the individual words themselves and the order they're placed, you start to see different ways of why the writer, whoever it was, put it in this way, and the incredible, profound meanings that are being conveyed just in these little words, isolated words at a time. It goes as deep as you can go. It really does.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's funny because people will say like, oh yeah, I read the course. Like it's like a book I read, I'm like, no, you didn't. You've never read it. I promise.
Yeah. Like, who are you and how, because I've had a very, it's not hard. I don't want to use that word. It's so, there's so much there. That's what's happened there. I will focus on a sentence and my body won't let me, I can't move past it yet. I mean, that's what's happened. And I condemned myself at first. I'm like, no, because judgment, of course, which I want to talk to you about. We'll get to that because I realized, oh shit, the label judgment is all. And so so that's when I say it, I'm like, nope, I have not gone through the whole thing, but it is so much of what I've sat with has worked me, so much of it.
Yeah. Well put, I would say. I think that, when you read the course, you have to let it take as much time as it wants to take. That's the best way to read it. It took me over a year to read just the text itself. Like there's different sections. The actual text part is about 600 something pages. And then there's the daily lessons, 365 lessons. And then there's the manual for teachers and all that. Just the text itself took me well over a year to read because like there would just be these passages that just hit me like a battering ram. And I'm like, how am I just going to keep reading after that? Like, I got to go back to this and just chew on this. And ego comes in because ego's the collector, the enhancer. It needs to feel like it's getting something out of this. So it's like, come on, keep reading so you can finish this book, so you can claim this book. Yeah, I've read A Course in Miracles, right? And so there's this, you're in this constant battle with ego's voice while you read it, because if you really want to get the most out of this text, you can't read it like a normal book. You have to read it like a contemplative work, a meditation, right? You got to meditate on these truths because they just penetrate to the deepest, most primordial parts of your soul. And that's where they do their work. And if you try to blaze through it, first of all, it's just going to sound like gobbledygook because it's all using Christian language. And I think very brilliantly from the Course's perspective, it uses that language on purpose for a number of reasons. But one of the most important reasons it uses those words, or that language, we could say, is because you won't understand the book until you are spiritually ready to. If you're still a bit of a spiritual novice, we might say, you're just kind of getting into your journey, you will not understand what the Course is talking about. You have a lot more you need to experience before these truths become known to you, because it's not intellectual, right? It's an in-seeing. It's about awareness.
I love that. I have to just highlight that word, just popped out. It is not intellectual. It is an in-seeing. That was so beautifully said. And this is the, I think, if it's okay to just pop in for a minute, I think this is part of the healing, is we have been so focused in here and achieving, and it's ego. And this, anyhow, back to you. All right.
Yeah. Enlightenment doesn't happen here. Right.
Yeah. He's pointing to his head. If you're listening, Aaron, exactly. And but the ego will have you think that it's happening, it should happen there. And it doesn't, yes. It can't, that's not where it's meant to happen. It doesn't even, to me, it doesn't even live there.
No, it's funny how the source intelligence uses the intellect, I think, in the conscious mind to bring a seeker to true enlightenment, we could say, is because really the more, ego will paint it like enlightenment is a journey of collecting knowledge. So keep reading, keep learning, keep collecting concepts. Eventually, boom, you'll be enlightened. So you read more books, you listen to more lectures, and you're gaining all this knowledge. But what I like to say, what happened to me in my experience, all the spiritual knowledge you gain that doesn't come with an equal amount of self-awareness leads to more suffering. The ego will weaponize that knowledge against you. It'll start to use these concepts against you because you haven't actually embodied it or lived it yet. So ego will hold that against you and say, oh, well, you know that you're supposed to be loving, but look at the way you talked to your husband just now. You're obviously not very spiritual or enlightened, are you? Actually, maybe you're getting worse. Oh my God. They do this to you all day long.
Bingo. Can we focus on that for a minute? That's very real. I'm like, actually, that happened last night, not necessarily with my husband, but just with, I wasn't as kind. My mom has some anxiety and I wasn't as kind. And I was like, that wasn't very loving. I stand for love. That's not love. Yeah. And that's, so even that voice, that's ego.
That's ego, because what's happening is who was rude to your mom, right? Well, there's a sense of, well, I was, shame on me. Yeah. But that I is the conditioned ego. It's programming responding to a stimulus. And as you're becoming aware of that, somebody who's not aware yet, who's not awakening yet, won't even know they were rude to their mom. Well, yeah, I told her what's what, and she deserved to hear that. I hope she remembers that lesson. Like, that's the way that an unconscious person will be. There's no awareness yet. Yeah. So you had the awareness of, oh, that wasn't loving. I wish I hadn't said that. But you're almost there, right? There's one more step to take. I wasn't the one who said that. That wasn't my comment. That wasn't my feeling, my reaction. That was the ego's reaction. And so really it's like the beingness, the awareness within you is sort of burping out these egoic conditionings for you. And only once they come out and are manifest, can you see them and go, that's not love. I choose to turn away from that in my heart. Whatever is not love is not me. And so in your heart, you don't identify with it, right? Because guilt is the anchor point for ego. If it can keep you guilty, it will keep you identified.
Oh my goodness. Say that again. Guilt is the anchor point of the ego. That is, I'm trying to take notes as fast as I can. I'm laughing because my son is downstairs. I can hear him talking to my mom out loud. Like, well, there you go. They're totally in sync with, right on time. So this is huge. Guilt is an anchor point of the ego. So, okay, let's go through this. So you identify. So like I just wasn't as loving as I could have been. I was a little short. I didn't like how that felt. That's not who I am. And I felt like, why did I do that? I'm upset. Like I got frustrated. So that conversation, even that thinking that's me, that's ego. So for those listening that are like, okay, so what do we do to stop associating with ego so that, because for me, like living in love, that, what is said, love, which created me is what I am. Like, I want to be feeling and being, and I think others listening, like, will want to live in our heart. How do we do that?
Yeah. Great question.
And you can talk as long as you like, Aaron, on that one.
Well, this is a fun one to talk about because it's really, I think, at the threshold of spiritual awakening. This is the most challenging catalyst for us spiritual seekers, in quotes, because we have this self-image of who we are. I'm spiritual. This is the spiritual ego. I'm a loving, conscious, awake person, etc. And so anything that comes out of the mind-body unit that doesn't live up to that self-image gets shamed and guilt-tripped.
Yeah.
Because that's what ego does. Ego is, what I like to say is, ego is the mental activity of identifying. That's all it is. It's not a person. It's not an entity. It doesn't exist in that sense. It's literally a function of the working mind. And it is that function that says, that was me. I did that. Me, my, I, my, mine, right? So any self-image I have, whether it's I'm the greatest, I'm the best athlete, I'm the most beautiful person, whatever, I have to constantly live up to that identity. And the moment that identity is even threatened a little bit, suffering. What is suffering? Suffering is ego cracking the whip to say, live up to that identity, protect it, defend it. And so basically the ego is always punishing you into carrying out its orders. It's like a cruel taskmaster, right?
Yep.
Always sending you out on another mission. Live up to this, fulfill this, achieve this. And so the spiritual ego, the spiritual identity is maybe the most tricky one of all because, hey, it appears to be virtuous to feel bad for being unloving. Who would question that, right? Only a very awakened consciousness can start to see the futility of that, because really what's happening is you're feeling guilty for what came out. Feeling guilty is identifying, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It's so brilliant. I actually shared about this recently. I have a history of also being in 12 steps and support groups, and we do resentment lists. And I was one of the awareness I actually thought of you and thought of this conversation. And I shared this in an episode a couple of weeks ago. I was doing my list, and I, for so long, Aaron, couldn't even write what I was resentful about, because the part of me that was like, you shouldn't feel this way. You understand, you have a 360 perspective. The thing was, my judging that was ego, even judging the feelings. It's taken me a long ass time to be able in my life to see, just write what you're feeling without judgment. Don't label that label. That label of judgment is deadly. And, the moment I wrote it out, it was kind of like, I could see, oh, it's just a piece of old cellular memory. There's no weight. There's no, but it's so insidious, this judger, it is unbelievable. And the spiritual ego, I think what you're talking about is, I relate to that one, because it comes in as it wears the virtuous robe. It wears that, like, I'm here to help you, bring light to the planet, which is something I do want to do. And it does it's exactly what you just said. It's really powerful.
Yeah, that's why we have these archetypes of the wolf in sheep's clothing. The devil comes clothed as an angel of light. The spiritual ego walks in a Swami's robe and says, hey, shame on you for that unloving thing. You should have known better. You go, oh, yes, I should have known better. But what's actually happening is it's keeping you anchored in that spiritual seeker role who will never be complete, right? You have to annihilate that concept of self completely and realize there's only love here. There's only God here. There's nothing to do judging. There's nobody who has a bias to judge from. It's just conditioning. It's a story. It's a memory I'm referring to as myself, and it isn't true. And so what needs to happen, and I sometimes tongue in cheek will refer to this as the walking the dog phase of awakening.
Yeah.
Because people will say, well, if I don't feel horrible about all the bad things I do, then why will I change my behavior? And I say, actually, the opposite is true. The more horrible you feel, the more you will perpetuate it.
Yeah.
And so the analogy is, if you're walking your dog and you know you're not your dog, right? You're just taking care of your dog. But if your dog craps in somebody's lawn, do any one of us go, well, not my crap, I'm not cleaning it up? Of course not, right?
Yeah.
As a good dog owner, you clean up your dog's messes, but you don't feel guilty.
Right.
You don't feel guilty that you crapped on someone's lawn. In the same way, you begin from the reference point of, I am love, I am that, and I will live life and engage with life from that position as if it's the fact of the matter.
Yep.
Regardless of what I feel or what the mind says, doesn't matter. I am love, period, end of story. Then whatever comes out of the person, the conditioning that isn't love, you clean up the mess. Just like with your dog. I'm so sorry I said that. That wasn't the kindest way I could have phrased that. Please forgive me. But inwardly, you're not going, whoa, boo-hoo, poor me. I thought I was more spiritual, because that's keeping you trapped in that suffering separate self that'll never be good enough, that'll never complete itself. You don't win from that point of view, right? You just abandon that point of view. You give it up. And slowly, the mind and the conditioning will catch up to you. But there's a period of time where that catching up is happening, as we talked about, where awareness is watching that programming sort of burping out those old programs, those distortions, in the form of an unloving comment, a judgment, insecurity, whatever it might be. All you are is the witness, the loving awareness that allows it to present itself. You have to allow that distortion to manifest, because it's going to, right, if it's in there. But the way that you heal it is by letting it release and not judging it, not judging yourself or identifying with it, just letting it be there and forgiving it. And that's why the Course talks about forgiveness is the path to heaven, because forgiveness really is a step-by-step destruction of that old identity. Piece by piece, you're forgiving every little thing. Of course you thought you were betrayed. You thought you were a separate person. You thought you were abandoned from your source. Of course you were upset. That's totally natural from your point of view. I'm only here to show you that there's a higher point of view available, which is oneness.
My goodness. I'm, again, there's like a lot of ways we could go. One of the things I think I'd like to touch upon is your feelings or thoughts about using what you're saying about A Course in Miracles and this all we are is love, and what is happening on the planet today. And for me, and I'm curious, and I've read this many, many places, like we're either in fear or love. There's been a massive conditioning of fear. Part of what I feel I've been doing this last year is reconditioning myself. And I don't want to judge it. See, if I judge it, that's ego, I was going to say, and I'm not there, but like I'm seeing it.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing it as an observer, like, wow, there's a lot of fear everywhere. And it shows up in like 5,000 costumes. And it's just, I don't know. I'm curious, because there's been I feel like the fear that's been kind of pushed into this the past year, it seems real. People are really seeming to think it's real, and maybe how to navigate what's happening today in this world with what's happening, COVID, with all of the fear, to stay in that love. I mean, I know what I'm doing, but I'm curious for you and A Course in Miracles, like what can we do to just be in or of the world, not in it, and to stay in that love?
Yeah, that's the really relevant question right now for all of us, all living in this world. The Course talks about, and this was one of the most liberating concepts for me the Course puts forward, is that there's basically just sanity or insanity.
Yeah.
That's it. Separation is insanity. Arguing with reality, denying reality, fighting with reality is insanity. That's all the ego does. And so there's no right or wrong, good or bad in that sense. There's just different levels of consciousness, different rates of vibration. And we could say a slower vibration doesn't have access to higher spiritual truth yet, because it's stuck in this very slow, dense reality where it's me against the world and everyone's out to get me and attack me and all this stuff. So it's the victim role. And the victim role has sort of in society, and really what it is, again, it's a burping out. It's a expression of a shadow aspect of human consciousness right now.
Yeah.
and we're working through it. And so it's a good thing that it's doing what it's doing, because it has to be presented, as we've
Yeah.
said.
Yep.
But it's challenging, and it provides a lot of good catalyst. And at this point in our world, I think, I guess more so in America, I can only speak for my country, but the victim role has become, in the public eye, like the most virtuous role one can have.
Yeah.
And so who's the greatest victim of all is the most virtuous one of all. And we bow to the greatest victim. And again, from that low, slow, dense vibrational state, you can't see that that's actually unloving to do to somebody, to make them a victim. It's not helping them. It doesn't help anybody. It only perpetuates suffering. They can't see that at this level, so they're doing the best that they can do.
Yeah.
And from a higher perspective, it's totally insane to believe that you can create unity. Like we all say, all we want is peace and unity. And we're going to create it through more division and strife, right? We're going to hate each other more, and eventually we'll arrive at unity.
No.
So the right hates the left hates the right, and this whole play goes on. And so I think it's our responsibility as those who are fortunate enough to have been met by grace in this lifetime to be on a spiritual awakening path, to just be the light and show that there's a higher state of consciousness available, which is called unconditional love and forgiveness. Because I don't know how long it has to take for people to realize that you cannot, like, vengeance doesn't ever work. You never get revenge and eventually arrive at satisfaction, right? It just perpetuates that anger and that hatred even more. And then it strengthens the opposite side more. So what you fight, you strengthen, and the two sides just keep holding their grievances against one another and trying to seek vengeance against one another. And it's this never-ending, insane battle that can only be ended by forgiveness and love.
Yeah.
And so we're, I think, at this place of our conscious evolution where we're trying to and starting to realize this. And so the really extreme pendulum swings are a good thing in that sense, because the more extreme the pendulum swings, the more insanity there is on display. And the more insanity on display, the more we get to see through awareness, oh, that's not a winning point of view, right? This is not a helpful way of dealing with the problem. So there must be another way. And that's actually how the Course of Miracles came about. Helen Schuckman, who is the channeler of the Course, and her colleague, William Thetford, they were in a university, I believe it was, totally blanking right now, not Cambridge, might've been Columbia University.
Yeah, I think in New York. I think you're right.
NYU
or Columbia.
One of the big ones.
Yep, big one.
There was a lot of like political strife on the campus and all this different stuff. And they were both getting wearied by it. And they said, this is just totally insane. Like, everyone's gone mad here.
Yeah.
There's got to be a better way. And Helen kind of made this intention in her heart of like, there's got to be a better way, a more efficient, effective, psychological approach to these problems. And I'm determined to find it. And that intention is what allowed the channeling to come through. And I think within a day or two of having that conversation with William, she sort of heard this voice within herself that said, this is A Course in Miracles, please take notes. And she kind of sloughed it off like, that was weird. And she told William about it. And he said, well, if it happens again, take notes. And so the next day or whatever, the voice came back, this is A Course in Miracles, please take notes. And she was a total agnostic, maybe even an atheist. So she wasn't like religious at all. But that, the first line came through, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, and herein lies the peace of God. And so I think the problem we see today is that everyone is equating themselves with the unreal. I am this body, I am black, I am white, I am this identity, this gender, that gender. They're identifying with things that are just transitory illusions. They're not what you are.
Yeah.
And so you can't ever satisfy those identities. And all you can ever do is enhance the suffering that comes from them. So we're at a point where we need to begin realizing that all identification is unhelpful and creates more division. If we want to know that we are one, we have to look past the body and see what's within it, that light of God within everyone. And we have to love that.
Oh, beautifully said. Oh my gosh, Aaron, I'm like, yes, This is one of those, I'm taking notes if you're listening, and we will have this because I feel like this is one people are gonna listen again and again. I want to ask you, so this idea of oneness and unity, and kind of going back for a minute, and I'd love to talk a little bit about the law of one and the idea of the sky, and you talked about the bubbles. So part of what's coming to me is this idea that that we're all of the one source, and individuated expressions, or however you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were speaking, I was, just to go back for a minute, thinking about the victimhood and what I'm seeing. There's been a part of me that's had a lot of compassion for those that are really like out there in victimhood, because it's like what keeps coming through me is they're not awake. Like they're identifying with this unreality. And where have I done that? And actually, what part of me is in them? Because if we're all of the same thing, and I don't know if this is something you're going to get into, but it's kind of a little uncomfortable, I think, to look at it this way. But anybody that might even be in the extremist, or I wouldn't even ever be on that side or this side, it's like, but if we're all of that unified consciousness, what part of that is in me, or is part of me, or is for me to heal? And I don't know if that's something you've looked at or talked about, but there's a piece of me that's just very curious about all of the individuated expressions of the one, and making sure I'm not opting out as, because that could be ego. Well, I'm not that. I am I have a more evolved consciousness. And it's like, maybe, yet there's still a oneness. And I don't know. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. This is exactly why we can't judge anyone for where they're at.
Yeah.
Because they just can't see it. It's not their fault in that sense.
Yeah.
In the same way that you can't expect a second grader to pass a trigonometry exam. Yeah. They haven't had enough experience in mathematics to do that. It would be insane on your part to get mad at the second grader for not passing that test.
Yeah.
And so, as the course would say, it's also insane for you to judge your brother for their misdeeds, we could say, because first of all, what you judge in someone else, you're judging in yourself. That concept is very abstract for most people. But what it really is talking about is whatever energies you have not met with compassion and forgiveness and love and transcended within yourself, you will still look upon unfavorably in others, because there's a bit of that remnant in you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you won't see it or observe it, or have the discernment to see it. And this is, again, where a lot of people get confused between like judgment and discernment. To call a certain behavior insane doesn't have to be a judgment. It depends on what position you're speaking from. If you're making it a superior or inferior thing, that's ego, and that's a judgment.
Yeah.
But if you're discerning that it's simply not in alignment with reality as reality is, that's what insanity is, right?
Yeah.
But you're not making yourself superior or inferior to them, because you have seen your own insanity.
Yes.
Right. I've been there too. I've made those mistakes. I didn't see that either. And once you acknowledge that within yourself and love that part of you and forgive it, then when you see it in somebody else, you still notice it. And really, even more so, you notice it, but you notice it with that loving awareness, that compassion of like, yeah, just like Jesus said, forgive them, Father. They know not what they do. I used to think that way. I used to behave that way because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
So whatever I love, I heal, but what I judge, I cannot love.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I love that. I love a heal. Well, and here's the other thing you said, judging others is insane. And I know that you talk about this too. It's also judging ourselves. It's what I come up against. And I'm thinking of last night, the example, I wasn't as kind. It wasn't terrible, but I wasn't as kind to my mom. And I'm feeling into it. I'm like, well, she has anxiety, and I sometimes have anxiety, but I don't love the feeling of it. And so when I sense it in her, like it's in me, everything is an outer reflection. So then really what I need is to bring in just complete compassion for when I feel anxious. Whoever that part of me needs to feel loved, which is a very different thing than I suck. I wasn't as kind. I could have been kinder. And it's like, that's actually the work. That's the deeper piece for us, just to look. That's, I think, what you were saying too. And what's triggering me out there is what's in here that needs to be healed.
Yeah. And that's really where the real work is done.
Yeah.
If you want freedom more than anything else, you will happily lay aside your self-criticisms and all your judgments and come to the foot of that altar with that broken-hearted humility, saying, please, Father, show me my arrogance, show me my ignorance. I want to see it so I can heal it. That forgiveness work is, to me, the most cutting-edge spiritual work available. Everybody wants to do like third eye chakra opening and past life regressions and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's like the most benefit is found through simply engaging with your own life with an open heart in every moment, an open heart towards the seeming outer world, and an open heart towards your inner world, judging absolutely nothing that appears, but meeting it with compassion and forgiveness. It's the hardest work to do. Yeah. And by far reaps the most benefits. So it's like whoever truly wants it, like whoever's really about that life is going to be doing that work.
Yeah, I love what you just said. That rings true. And I got to say, that is PhD. That's beyond PhD level. I mean, feel like I'm in like fourth grade, and I've been at it a while, and it's like that ego is just, you got to, and then you got to be. I always say you got to see it, but then what you said, you can't judge even ego. You got to like stay out of the land of basically don't go to judgment or shame, like, or fear. All of that is ego. All of that is getting in the way of course, love, which is not that. Can you talk a little bit, for those who don't know, about the law of one and that material? I mean, I know that's like, hey, can you tell us in a little bit of time, but whatever, maybe you can share. This is so amazing. And I like, literally, we might have to have you back and do round 2, 3, 4, and 5, because I don't want to ever end this conversation, but I just want those listening who don't know anything about the raw material, about law of one, to kind of get a sense what it is. Mm-hmm. Have you talk about it?
Yeah, it's sort of like, can you explain thermodynamics, please?
Maybe just the synopsis, like the idea of who Ra is, what the law of one says. I'll let you just channel what is the most important.
Yeah.
Explain how the world works.
The overview is very simple. It's again, like those channeled texts are so incredibly deep that we could really have infinite amount of conversations about it. Yeah. The overview is quite simple. It's also a channeled work from the 1980s, early 80s. There was a team of sort of like UFO researchers, we could say, who were very unique in the sense that they weren't as interested in the science of extraterrestrials and the phenomenality of UFOs and all that. They were really interested in the philosophy of extraterrestrials. And they sort of understood, like, if we really want to know who these beings are and what they're doing here, we should get more interested in their philosophy and their spirituality, because that's probably what's driving what they're doing. And so through the art of channeling, they somehow intuited, like, okay, these are beings of orders of magnitude higher consciousness than us. They probably don't use verbal language. They probably can read our minds. They probably just communicate through telepathy. So let's practice channeling and see if we can communicate with them. So for, I think, the better part of a decade, Don Elkins was leading this group of 12 channelers who were practicing this, and they would have some contacts here and there. But it was actually the girlfriend of one of the guys in the group, Carla Ruckart, who came in to the channeling sessions and was really fascinated. And she had a Christian background. And she was like, I want to learn how to do this. And she started practicing. And lo and behold, she was by far the most gifted channel in the group. And it's funny to me how women tend to be much better channelers than men. The feminine principles, that the unconscious, right? The feeling, the intuition. So I think they're more natural at it than men are, up in our minds and stuff. But yeah, she started channeling, and one night she had this contact come through with an entity that identified itself as Ra. And I was actually lucky enough to interview Jim McCarty, who was the scribe from the Law of One.
I heard some of it. I heard.
Did you listen to that one?
Yeah. Oh yeah. On my walk, I was like, dang, this is awesome. Yeah.
Great interview. I actually did 2 interviews with him.
Yeah.
And he talked about his perspective of that story, where he had just gone out to get some groceries, some food or whatever for the group. And he kind of barges in the door and setting the groceries down. And Don's like, shh, Jim, shh, quiet, quiet. And Jim's like, sorry, like, what'd I do? And he was like, we got something. And so he tiptoes in and listens to this conversation. And so they went, this is by far the most profound contact we've had. Let's do a dedicated channeling session. So the three of them, Dawn, Jim, and Carla, did started doing channeling sessions where, Carla, they were doing unconscious channeling. So total trance state, no waking awareness at all, which is very different from conscious channeling, like Abraham Hicks or whatever, or Bashar, where they're like on stage talking with their eyes open. Unconscious channeling is complete direct communication from the entity itself, whereas conscious channeling is more like I'm getting feelings and messages and I'm translating them into how I would phrase it, right? So it's the most accurate way of channeling, but it's also the most difficult. And this entity identified itself as Ra, which is a social memory complex of the sixth density. So a social memory complex is essentially when a planetary species like humans or whatever, at any planet, evolve in consciousness to such a degree that telepathy evolves, mind-to-mind communication evolves. As that continues to progress, eventually minds can basically just share information, share their minds with others. Like I can read every thought you have, every memory. And so in that sense, the sense of separation dissolves over time, because once I have equal access to your mind as I have to my mind, well, who's me and who's you, right? We both have the same exact information available, the same sense of self available. So as that happens, the whole planetary civilization eventually shares one mind. And that's called a social memory complex. And so that begins in what they define as the fourth density of consciousness. We're really still in the third, sort of shifting into the fourth now. But Ra is of the sixth density, which is like billions of years more advanced. So at that level, the physical vehicles are basically just pure light, like a light body. And so they can travel through time and space as they wish. They can read thoughts and minds as easily as picking up a child's toy. So Ra kind of picks up the human language like a child's toy and uses it to communicate with us. Sort of like if we imagine communicating with cavemen 200,000 years ago, we would easily pick up the way that they communicate with their grunts and pointing at things. They just don't have very much advancement yet. So we can meet them at their level, but really we have a lot more information available than we can even share with them, right? It was kind of like that. So Ra is speaking to them and just sort of using our language, trying to convey the nature of the universe and who we are as beings here, all the important questions really. And they define it as the law of one, which means that all is one. There's just one infinite creator. Each one of us is a different expression of that creator, knowing itself. And we're all on a journey of evolution, we could say, which happens through this process of reincarnation. So it's a really amazing text in the sense that it gives real scientific language to these spiritual topics like reincarnation and souls and stuff that we haven't really had scientific language for. Even like the densities of consciousness and the model of reincarnation it presents. It's just, I've read the text now over 5 times. I'm on my 6th time through it. And every time I read it, I feel like I've never read it. It's like all this new information comes through that I just go, oh my gosh, it just blows my mind even more each time I read it, which is really how you know it is a truly inspired text.
I think it's so right. I sometimes wonder, as you're saying that, the capacity of a human, the mind, the consciousness that we can hold, like there are times where certain concepts, I'm like, if I breathe, I can let my body take it in. But some of these concepts I have found, I'm like, I don't have a place to like make meaning of that. It's almost too expansive. Yet to me, and for those listening, you're like, what do you mean there are other beings? Like for me, it's like, how could there not be other beings, and like how could we be the only, actually it's very egocentric to think we're the only ones. Actually, I just,
Oh,
that came to me.
extremely. Yeah.
It's really funny, actually.
It's
Like it's
almost
kind of,
embarrassing when you
it
think about
is.
it.
I'm like, well, my son who loves like the galaxy, and we were talking, and he's like, of course there are other beings, and I was like, yeah, of course, like, but that was just, it was such a fun conversation, and I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm 11 too, like I'm just, but it's true. Like, how could we not have? I mean, it's, how could there not be way, way, way more? We can see that, and so the sixth density. Aaron, does it go into, maybe to talk about, I know there's the concept of 12 densities or 144 densities, or does it get into like how many densities are there, or is it infinite? And how we moving into the fourth density, my question is, what can we do to be more in alignment with the fourth density? Maybe that's an ego question, but it's not coming from there, at least.
No, not at all. That's, I mean, in a sense, you could say it is, but that's the whole purpose of what we're doing here,
Yeah.
is to ask these questions to know who we are and to evolve as souls. And each density sort of reaches for the next one as it's sort of like as its salvation, you could say. Really more so from third to fourth, because third density, according to Ra, is the only density of the seven that has what we call suffering in it. Psychological, mental suffering. Of course, there's physical pain at all densities. Well, I don't know about the light body densities, probably not, but second density, which is like animals and insects, lots of pain in there, but there's really not much, if any, psychological suffering, because the second density is the density of consciousness before consciousness becomes self-aware. Self-awareness is the third density of consciousness. And that can really only happen through the advent of language, because the mind has to become an object to itself, which means it has to label other things as objects first. So certain species of animals have some semblances of labels, noises and sounds they make, but nowhere near as complex as ours, which is like sharing ideas through noises and really complex topics. That's a self-awareness evolution. And so to answer your question about the densities, there are infinite densities in the sense that there's only 7 densities, in the same way that there's only 7 notes on a musical scale.
Okay.
There's only 7 colors of the rainbow. But there are infinite amount of sub-densities in between those stages, right? Just like there's an infinite amount of, what's the word in music where you shift up a frequency a little bit?
Octave? Like, no.
No, not an octave, but anyway, it's just a small degree of change in the note.
Yeah.
Yes, that is infinite, but it's helpful to know that there's just these 7 major stages that consciousness moves through. And just to encapsulate them really quick, the first one, the first density, is the density of pure beingness. So that correlates to the root chakra. Each density is represented in a chakra. So that's the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, air. So consciousness spends like something like 2 billion years, at least on planet Earth, with those 4 elements interacting, right? Earth and water and fire and magma and wind. Eventually, microbial life is formed on Earth in the water, and single cell life evolves. And that's the very beginning of second density, which is where consciousness gains the ability for conscious movement and growth, where it can interact with its environment in a conscious way. So everything from like microbial life through insects, plants, and animals is the second density of consciousness. And that's, again, another 2 to 3 billion years or so. All the way through that spectrum, really from kind of like single cell life all the way up through like a pet. Like a pet would be the last stage of second density, because when we have pets, we give them names, we teach them some of our language and rules and boundaries. So we're helping that second density consciousness learn the lessons of third density, which is self-awareness. Human beings became self-aware and entered into the third density of consciousness. And so we can see observably in our own world that definitely those 3 densities of consciousness exist. There's a definite difference between my consciousness and an animal consciousness. And there's a definite difference between an animal consciousness and a rock's consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the law of one says that model keeps going. And in the fourth density, that is the density where consciousness becomes aware of unity. We call that love. So third density is all about separation, which creates wars and tribes and all the other things we have seen in our third density experience. But it also creates a lot of great things like technology and economies and governments and whatever else and structure. But that structure creates more and more division and more strife, which causes consciousness to seek for a solution, right? How do we end this strife and this war and this division between us? Well, it has to be through love. We have to overlook our differences and see that there's one principle within everything that is identical, and that's that I am, that sense of existence. We all exist, and we all exist within the same creation, which means we all must be one. We call that love. So fourth density is the density of love, and that correlates, of course, to the heart chakra, the fourth chakra, which we correlate to love, of course. And then fifth density correlates to the throat chakra, which is the wisdom density or the density of light. Light is the illumination, the illuminating principle that reveals. And so wisdom is sort of like self-knowledge, and authenticity is fifth density. So the ability to radiate myself regardless of the action of the other or of the environment. That's authenticity. Moving to the sixth density, we get to the third eye chakra, the pineal gland. And that's the density Ra is in, which is the density of unity. So that's where love and wisdom have to be maintained in equal balance. And if there's an imbalance between those two, we could also look at it as the masculine and the feminine principle. Feminine principle is love, masculine principle is wisdom.
Oh, wow.
So those two have to be perfectly balanced in sixth density, which is actually takes many incarnations and experiences to do that. And then we get to the seventh density, which is of course, the crown chakra. And they call that the gateway density. And they say we don't actually know much about what it's like in seventh density because we haven't been there yet. But they do have teachers and guides from seventh density, as all densities do, that help them learn the lessons of seventh density so they can become and evolve into that. And it's basically that last stage before consciousness merges back with the source.
Right. Okay, first of all, as I'm listening, I'm like, my heart is like, oh my God, this feels right. This feels like it aligns. I'm like, okay, I really want to be in the fifth and the sixth. I'm just laughing. I'm like, well, I'll tell you, Aaron, it's interesting. This could go real out there. I've had, I don't want to get too off track. I just will say this. I've had a lot of memory images. I can't explain it, of a light form that I've in that feels like what you're talking about. And I think there are times where I'm like, I just want to get back there. Yet we're here, we're human, and we're moving into this. I mean, I think that's part of the Aquarius shift, right? Is moving into this fourth density. I don't.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, I'm curious. So for those that are into like the angelic realm, or in addition to Ra, but like some of the more well-known, like Archangel Michael, or you could say, of course, Jesus or Raphael, are the ones that we might know. Are they in the seventh density? Would they probably be in the fifth or the sixth, or are they coming from, like, where would we put that angelic realm? I'm just curious. That's a lot out there.
Yeah, that's a great and really fun question. I have a video in my Law of One series. It's episode 3, called "The Science of Angels."
Oh, I saw this a while ago, and I'm sorry. My friend Jesse
very,
Harless had me watch it.
Very dense.
No, I saw it with my friend Jesse Harless. Hi, Jesse. Jesse is the one who is a huge fan and got me into all your work. And it is dense. I don't think I obviously need to hear it again. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we could say, in biblical writings, the angels are always described as beings of light.
Yeah.
And in other spiritual texts as well. And so that would be exclusively a fifth density phenomenon. Ra explains that the third density vehicle, or the each chakra is a color, on the color spectrum. So the
Right.
third solar plexus chakra is yellow. So Ra says the yellow ray vehicle, or a third density body, is a very heavy, dense chemical vehicle. So we're basically a bag of chemicals, right? A fourth density or green ray body is partially chemical and partially electromagnetic energy. And obviously we have a ton of electromagnetic energy in our bodies, and we can see that in different forms of our technology and stuff. But the fourth density body becomes a little more translucent, ethereal, more light. By the fifth density, because it's 30 plus million years of evolution, fifth density is basically pure light, pure electromagnetic energy, because the vibratory rate of consciousness is so fast that a heavy, dense chemical vehicle couldn't sustain it or filter it, right? It wouldn't, there's no capacity for that level of vibration. So the body has to reflect the evolution of the consciousness. It has to match. So at fifth density, it's pure light, as well as sixth density. So what we could call angels are really just extraterrestrial entities from other worlds that are in the fifth density or higher.
Well, that was well said. I'm like, yep, that's just, well, it takes out it's like, that's what it is. It's just really simply, I know if you're listening, you might want to listen again and again. All of your videos, I'll be honest, like I often have had to watch them multiple times, and then it's like, and where did it go? I feel it, but this is a lot of, I don't want to say it's dense information, but there's a lot that we hear, and we're just scratching the surface. Before we begin to wrap at least this conversation, because I'm realizing, I mean, I could just go on and on. I mean, this feels like just the beginning, truthfully.
We're having fun.
It's so fun. See, this to me, honestly, this is one of the most fun things in the world, is to have this kind of conversation.
I totally agree.
I mean, someday I'm like, hey, you want an 8-hour marathon? I'll do it. And whoever wants to join, you can just talk, ask questions.
With a few bathroom breaks.
Right. Take a little break, a little snack. I want to ask you to just tap into, so I call them heart flares, and it's like where your heart, maybe there's something I didn't ask you, or there's a message coming through you, or just something you really want to share with everyone. Before we wrap this conversation, is there anything I didn't ask you, or something that you feel your heart really wants to share that you're feeling would be very helpful to our listeners?
What's most relevant for me, at least right now, is just this this becoming journey. We're always in the state of becoming. We're never static. And right now, Mother Gaia in our world has offered us so much catalyst for becoming love. And that is really the evolutionary leap that we're making as a species, as a collective. This leap from believing we're separate to understanding that we are one. And the recognition of oneness is what we call love. And we can't look to the world to do that. We can't point fingers. We can't wait on the world to do that, because you are the world, right? It's so easy to look out at all these people hustling and bustling around and say, oh, look at the world out there. And then I'm in here. We separate ourselves. But I'm just as much the world as any of those people I see out in the world. We are all the world. And in that sense, it becomes our own obligation to wake up to who we are and to evolve. So it's, there's so many great quotes that have been made on this topic. Don't try to change the world. The world is just an effect. Change yourself and you change the cause of the world, right? That's really what I think the most relevant message for any of us is right now. Take your responsibility for growth into your own hands. Don't worry about the world. Don't try to change the world. Don't complain about the world, because it's just an effect of your own state of consciousness. When you become love, you will not see anything unworthy of love in the world anymore. So if the world is bothering you, causing you suffering and stress and anxiety, realize that's an inward problem, not an external problem. And the only solution is to, again, meet my life moment by moment with that open-hearted, loving awareness. Everything that disturbs my peace is an opportunity from source, from higher self, to transcend, to evolve, to grow, to become more like the one infinite creator. And as we do that, our vibration increases and we contribute to the planetary vibration. So in a very real sense, in a very scientific sense, your healing is the world's healing. I mean, we even know this, right? If you have a room full of angry, unconscious people, but one grounded, loving, aware person walks into that room, the vibration changes. The energetic relationships in the room change immediately because your vibration raises the vibration of whatever you're around. Your aura affects, your energy affects everything. So I'm at this place now where, and this is very much a fifth density way of seeing it, we could say, but the most service I can offer to the world is my own spiritual evolution. And that means becoming love in every moment. And like you've been saying throughout this whole podcast, whatever comes out of this mind-body unit that's not love is just an opportunity to grow and transcend. That's all it is.
No words. Just going to give a moment of silence. That was so, so beautiful. It's really powerful. We are certainly aligned. And that was absolutely, I think, one of the more powerful ways of looking at what's happening in the world right now and to really get, I don't even want to, I won't do it justice, but what you said about it's an inward problem. It's an inward place to heal. And the only thing that heals is love. So anything other than that, we just throw love on it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And if you're not ready to do that, there's no judgment in that.
Yeah.
That's again, just where you are.
Yeah.
But we just have to get to this place where, I don't know if it's we suffer enough, we get sick and tired of the same old story, the same old suffering again and again. And we get to this place where we go, you know what? I'm just going to forgive because damn it, I'm tired of suffering. And it really has to be selfish in that sense where you want to heal for your own sanity and your own peace of mind.
Yeah.
But the beauty of oneness means that whatever healing I acquire, I give to the world, becomes my extension.
Beautiful, Aaron. Oh my gosh, people can find you. Do you want to just share really quick? We'll have it in the show notes too, but I know you talked about your website. You have so many amazing videos. You have this course going on, your Course in Miracles. Where's the best place for everyone who's going to be like, where do I find him?
Definitely my YouTube channel. That's where all my work is at the moment, which really I'm the same link everywhere, just at Aaron Abke. So youtube.com/www.instagram Aaron Abke is where you can find me.
Amazing. Well, I just want to say from my heart and the greater heart and all of our hearts listening, just thank you for the work you're doing. Just being a stand of love. Like it oozes out of you. I felt immediately like I just want to be in your energy. And I am so grateful because what you're doing is really, it is shifting consciousness and heart. So I just want to thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate that so much, Julie. And again, thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute blast and I can't wait to do it again.